Welcome today. This is another one of our CEO conversations, and today I'm delighted and honored to host Randy Ross, who is the author of Relationomics and also the book Remarkable. Randy is a corporate speaker and is works with companies to help them to really develop remarkable cultures and really how to develop relationships that are healthy, which deals with all sorts of human resource issues as you deal with getting employees to be engaged in the workplace. So I'm delighted and honored to welcome Randy Ross to our CEO Conversations. Welcome, Randy.
Well, thanks, Kent. It's a pleasure to be here. I have enjoyed watching your work and appreciate our friendship, and it's a pleasure to be with you and the whole gang today.
Well, thank you very much. Well, I love your books. I highly recommend them to anyone that I meet. And, we featured one of your newest book, Relationomics, in one of our executive guides not too long ago. The first book that you wrote was Remarkable, and which is still an outstanding book where it talks about developing a remarkable culture and really developing that excellence in the workplace. Obviously, we're in a very difficult time for businesses. What would you remind them at this point about how to be remarkable in difficult times? Would you have some words of encouragement for them?
Sure. Well, first, let me just back up. The word remarkable itself holds a lot of importance for us. Obviously, it's the name of our company. It's the name of the book. And it's just a great word altogether because remarkable for us means that you deliver a service or a product in such a way that you blow people away. You deliver a world-class experience. You exceed all expectations. You do what you do in such a way that you leave people in awe. In other words, when they leave your presence, they have this irrepressible desire to talk about the positive impact that you've made in their lives. And when other people are talking about you and they're talking about the impact that you've made, then you indeed have become remarkable because they're remarking about you. But remarkable also means, from a slightly different perspective, is that you can mark someone's life for good on other people that is not easily erased. And so when you do something that's so profound, so impactful, that it leaves a positive wake in the world, then you have become remarkable. You've marked other people's lives for good. And there's no better time to mark people's lives for good than in the midst of a crisis. And so I think the crisis itself is revealing a lot of things about how people respond, but it reveals a lot about relationships. We can talk about that here in just a little while. But there's so many things that we can do right now to leave a positive wake in the world. And I guess it all sort of begins with a simple idea and concept that you can either be a value extractor or you can be a value creator. Mm. And right now, in times of crisis, there's a stark contrast between value creators and value extractors. And you can see it almost in every aspect of life as you look on the internet, as you have personal conversations. Either people are going to have one of two things. They're going to have a scarcity mentality because this whole pandemic that we're in the middle of has, I don't have to tell you, it's interrupted supply chains. It's made resources scarce. It's caused people to be filled with stress, anxiety, fear, depression. And so a scarcity mentality will create this response that says, hey, there's only so much to go around. So therefore, I've got to rush to the table to get as much for myself as I possibly can if I want to survive. That's a scarcity mentality. But an abundance mentality says this, no. If we all work together and we all bring more to the table than we take away, if we create value for others, then there will be a surplus at the end of the day that can be shared by everyone who helped to create that value. And so a value extractor in times like these become very, very obvious, let's just say. Mm. And I think the key or secret for all of us is during this period of time to make sure that you surround yourself with value creators who have an abundance mentality and are seeking to bring value to the world. Now, that's interesting right now because some of the value that we have the opportunity to bring to the world may or may not materialize into some sort of monetary remuneration.
All right.
But I can assure you, I can't, I'm doing a ton of broadcasts right now, just like yours, absolutely free, because I want to bring hope and encouragement into the world.
All right.
But I just have this deep seated belief that in the end, maybe not next week or next month, but in the end, it's going to pay off, because relationships will be enriched and value will be created. And that will inspire people on one level or another to be better. So that's just a few words about Remarkable.
I love it. And I think, you hit on a couple of points that I just resonate with so deeply. I think one of the principles I talked about in my book, Well Done, about trusting the law of sowing and reaping, right? And,
Sure.
now's the planting seeds. We're in a seed planting season. And one of the ways that we do that is we just continue to use what resources we have, knowing that what we're depositing today can reap a harvest for us in the future, right? And that's valuable. That's value added. We're just planting those seeds all through the field, if we would use that analogy. And I loved your concept about value creators. Um, you know, I believe in one of the things that I teach companies myself and teach next level leaders. I taught my kids this as well. I believe I got this, but it's a simple statement, which is that the more value you create, the more valuable you become. And, when you think about, because I get a lot of, I call them next level leaders, employees that say, hey, well, how can I get a raise? And when will people appreciate what I'm doing? And I just remind them, hey, just continue to create value. Figure out ways in your company to create as much value as you can. Learn a new skill, learn a new way to handle a customer complaint. Learn more, do more. And as you become more valuable, your business owner will see it. They'll reward that value, or another company will, right, at some point. And I think we need to practice that from a company perspective as well. So I love that idea. Thank you for that. Speaking of your online
Yeah.
webinars and some of the things that you're doing, can you tell us maybe some opportunities that we can get involved in, or other people can and find out more about what you're doing?
Well, I'm doing a ton right now of joining in conversations like the one that we're having right now. But we've also shifted, as many people have, trying to provide some of our resources through online rather than in person types of formats. And so there are a variety of workshops that we provide, both on Remarkable, but also on the content of Relationomics, where teams can be encouraged during these days. So that's just something that we've done. We've had to pivot like everybody else to try to sustain the business during these days.
Well, I love your book, Relationomics, and the value of relationships. You do such a great job of helping any company, whether large or small, think through some of the relationship issues that they face in an organization. And we know, and actually we've seen it right now with the payroll protection program, most companies, and a lot of people don't recognize, but, many companies can spend upward to 80 to 90% of their revenue on their team, on payroll, on hiring people. Can you give us a few of your best principles where it comes to how to build healthy cultures through building good relationships?
Well, I think times like these really show the depth of relationships. And now is the best time to continue to invest in those relationships. Obviously, we've got to be sensitive about those issues that propel the business forward. But one of the things that I think we can do during this period of time is to deepen the relationships with team members that we currently have. And that's one of the reasons that I wrote the book Relationomics, was to help leaders understand some basic principles that can help them create environments that inspire people to bring their very best to work every day. And Ken, you and I talk about this, that healthy relationships are foundational, not only for business, but for life. We know through research, one of the largest and longest longitudinal studies that's come out of Harvard University just simply solidifies the fact that good, strong relationships make life healthier and happier, period. That seems like common sense. Unfortunately, it's not always common practice. And we say that people and organizations thrive in relationally rich environments. Well, times like this test the mettle. Times like this, I say it like this: tough times reveal
Mm,
what good times conceal.
Right.
People tend to get along great when times are easy and money is flowing and everybody's happy and there are no challenges. But when you hit a crisis like this that forces you to do two things, it forces you, first of all, to look at yourself, to ask yourself, am I really being the person that I was born to become? In other words,
Mm,
am I stepping up to be the leader that God's, called me to be during periods of time like this? And the frank reality is that many of us need to grow up.
mm,
And it's times like these that force us to grow in areas where we would not normally grow. Or here's another way of saying it, that people desire to grow, but we don't know how. And
mm,
let me back that up. The reason we don't know how is because we all have these areas in our lives that we call blind spots. And a blind spot is just simply defined as an area of your life that you need to work on that everybody else sees, but you don't see. It's something that needs to be brought to your attention because it's a way that you relate to the world that simply just doesn't work. And so we need people speaking truth into our lives. And this is a great time to ask for that kind of feedback. I'm having to do that literally almost every day right now with my wife and my kids. Um, my wife is completely overwhelmed, and let me just kind of paint the picture for you. Um, she is the executive vice president of a group here in town that is in property management, meaning that they manage apartment communities across the country, primarily along the eastern seaboard. So they're dealing with 36,000 apartment units. That
mm,
represents 36,000 families. And they just happen to have the greatest proportion of their residencies in New York, New Jersey,
mm,
Washington, D.C., uh, South Florida, all the hot spots for the pandemic. And on top of that, we had storms last week that blew across the country and did substantial damage to many of their properties. So suffice it to
mm,
say, she's on the phone putting out fires, dealing with crises, 12, 14, 16 hours a day. It's
right.
crazy. Well, I've got my own issues. And then we've got two of our four children still at home, a 21 and a 19-year-old, that we're just trying to keep them, from killing each other because they're bored to death. And when boys get bored, they want to wrestle. And so
Right.
they're destroying the house. Anyway, so all that's going on. And here's the question I have to ask every day, several times a day, baby, am I giving you what you need?
Mm,
Am I providing the support, the encouragement that you need to sustain you emotionally physically, even during this period of time? And so I'm finding myself doing more of the cooking. I'm doing more of the cleaning. I'm helping her titrate at night, just debrief, and download. But I'm having to grow. I'm being stretched, and I'm having to ask my boys, "Hey, am I being the kind of dad you need right now?" Because here's the thing, Ken. I don't want to come out of this. I don't want to come out of this crisis and this pandemic, and my kids 10 years from now look back on this and talk about it as being a miserable time. I
mm,
want them to look back on this and remember this with fond affection, being one of the times that our family was drawn closer together. And so every night we're doing a game hour. We have dinner together, which we haven't done. Many families haven't done it in a long time, but now stay at home is forcing us. We're doing dinners together. Right after dinner, we have what we call forced family fun. We have 1 hour. We're playing games together, whether you want to or not. We're playing games together, right? And so that plus just some incredible conversations that we're having in the midst of all this. So the depth of the relationship, a lot of that comes from my willingness to look at myself and do the hard work of introspection, change things about myself, my attitude, my approach, what I'm providing for them and also for team members during this time. And so investing deeply in those relationships, what does that look like? First thing it looks like is I've got to be open to feedback. And then I've got to be able to ask the right questions, because asking the right questions is, I think, the lost art of leadership.
mm,
And then, when necessary, having raw conversations. How do you have good, constructive, developmental conversations when they're necessary? And those are necessary. I've got a couple of team members during this period of time that I've had to have heart to heart, toe to toe, although it can't be eyeball to eyeball. I mean, not physically, we're distanced, but we've had to have some good developmental conversations, and you can't shy away from that either. So whether it's with your family, whether it's with your team, whether it's with your client base. I think times like this is critically important that we focus on deepening those relationships.
Wow, Randy, I'm going to quit recording the video though, because you've gone from being a good corporate trainer to messing with my personal life when you're challenging me to to ask my wife, "Hey, baby, am I giving you what I need, or what you need?" That's boy, but what a powerful question for us to think about, both from a leadership perspective and even from a personal perspective. I say I've learned a lot about my own personal relationships from business, where I bring over business concepts and ideas into my personal life. And I learn a lot about my business life from my personal life, right? And how do I do that? And, obviously, I love that you're focused on your wife and your children at this point and asking that question, am I giving you what you need? I think that's a good question for us as leaders, just like you were talking about, to ask our employees. Am I communicating well? Am I talking to them, or am I giving them what they need? Have I paid attention to what, you know, from a leadership perspective? Because sometimes, we, in times of crisis, I think we have a tendency to shut down and we
Yeah.
don't always communicate well. So, and then I got a comment about your forced family fund. It said, instead of the payroll protection program, instead of the PPP, we ought to start doing the FFF, right? The forced family fun time. That's
I
that's
love it.
that's
I
pretty
love
good.
it.
There you go. Maybe that's
Well,
another book.
and just a sidebar to this whole conversation, um, you can't become a great leader until you've done your homework.
Hmm.
And your homework just simply means that God has given you a microcosm of a training environment, and that's your home. And so when the more effective you are in building healthy relationships with your spouse and with your kids, the more effective a leader you're going to become. And we'll talk a little bit about that in Relationomics. You may recall the example of being a billboard. My wife is the best billboard I have to herald to the world how effective I am as a leader. And I often say I can tell the strength of a man by looking at the face of his wife, and vice versa. I can tell the strength and the happiness of a woman by or looking at her husband's face, because it's a reciprocal relationship of respect and growth. When we do our homework well, then we carry those same opportunities over into the relationships that we have in other areas of life. So do your homework.
Yeah, one of the questions actually I got asked prior to our session today that really ties into what we're talking about is, um, how should we handle it from a relationship perspective, both from when our employees have something to say about our blind spots because they can see them, or what you're just talking about is our children, because they can sometimes see, hey, dad or mom is they're messing things up here, or they have a tendency to do that. As a leader, how do we receive that information? I mean, you asked the question, am I giving you what you need at this moment? That's a great question. But when they say something back that's hard for us to hear potentially as a as a leader, what would you recommend? How should we receive that information?
Well, first of all, they're probably not going to offer you that feedback unless you ask for it.
Hmm.
There's always the fear and the intimidation aspect that they're not going to come to you often and be candid in giving you feedback on your performance, because they may be your direct reports. They may fear punitive measures. There may not be a high level of trust, whatever the case may be. The point is, it's not only important to receive feedback well, but as a leader, you must seek feedback.
Hmm.
And so you have to go to those that you work with and are even under your leadership, and you've got to ask this question consistently. How am I doing as your leader? Am I providing everything for you necessary for your success? How am I doing? Telling you, Ken, the first several times people are not going to answer honestly, because they aren't sure what the repercussions may possibly be. And so it's something you can't do once or twice. You need to do it systemically. It just needs to be consistently built into your operational structure. So what I say is this: the companies that I deal with that are most effective are those that have been able to successfully create open loops of continuous feedback throughout the life of the organization. And that begins with top tier leadership. You need to ask all the time, How am I doing? What's going on? What can we make better? And then in the book, we talk about being in the growth spiral, because you enter into the growth spiral at that very point of feedback. And you've got two options. You can either descend that growth spiral if you get defensive, as we often do, especially if someone close to us, let's say our spouse, offers us feedback on how we can do better, particularly if it's unsolicited. That can sometimes be difficult to hear. And so if we get defensive, we begin to rationalize and justify our behavior. But rationalization always leads to stagnation. It means that we're not willing to grow, we're not willing to learn, we're not willing to listen. And stagnation always descends to alienation.
Mm.
And so we have to be really careful not to slide down that slippery slope from defensiveness, justification, stagnation to alienation. What we need to do when we receive feedback is to ascend the growth spiral, which means that we need to demonstrate honest evaluation first, embracing all the feedback, asking a lot of good questions, trying to wrap our heads around what's being offered. Honest evaluation, then the next step up is solution orientation.
Mm.
Something like, hey, Ken, thank you so much for bringing that to my attention. I really appreciate it. What I've heard you say is this, and this. Hey, will you do me a favor? Will you help me with that?
Mm.
I'm asking you, I'm giving you carte blanche, continuously give me feedback on how I'm doing. If you ever see me going down a bad path again, would you just kind of nudge me? Just kind of poke me, whatever it takes, just bring it to my attention again. And so that solution orientation, I'm inviting you to come over onto my team to become a part of my personal development board. And
Mm.
I want you to come onto my side. So rather than being alienated from one another and being stagnated, now we come together, and that breeds unification. And unity is very inspirational. So that growth spiral is critically important. Now to your question, um, I've got 4 kids. I've got three boys and a girl, and I know how to rear boys. Boys are easy. You just slap them on the back, you wrestle with them occasionally, you get them in a headlock and you feed them every once in a while. They're fine. They're good. If when you hit a boy, he knows you love him. That's basically how you raise a boy. But having a baby girl scared me to death. I didn't know what to do. My younger sisters were so young. I was in college before they were ever in middle school. So I didn't get that whole part of it. And early on, I had a mentor of mine who said, you know what, Randy? He said, be sure that you date your daughter.
Mm.
And so at a very early age, when she was young, we would have tea parties. I ate more cucumber sandwiches than I ever cared to admit. But throughout her life, I've always taken her on dates, just special dates, much like I plan weekly dates with my wife. I would plan occasional dates with my daughter, and she's traveled with me. She's gone to speaking engagements with me. We've had a wealth of wonderful experiences together. But almost every time we get together in one way, shape, or form, I ask her this question. Her name is Lindsay. I say, hey, Linz, how am I doing?
Mm.
And she knows exactly what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is, how am I doing as your dad? Because here's the thing. I don't have the luxury of messing up.
Mm.
I haven't done it before. I'll never do it again. You're my one and only daughter. I want to make sure, am I doing everything right? Am I providing for you what you need? The encouragement, the support, the love, the resources. Am I doing a good job? And at first she'll roll her eyes, but she'll always say, Dad, you're so good at this, and this. And there's a but. There's a but. But if there's one thing I could encourage you to do, and then she'll lay that on me. And we've had some of the most wonderful, in-depth conversations
Mm.
about what does she need from me to feel secure, to feel loved, to feel beautiful, to feel successful, to feel like she can approach her future with confidence. And like, here's the best part of it. If you were to call her today and ask her who her best friend is, it would either be her mom or me,
Wow.
one of those two.
Wow.
And she calls regularly. And here's what she asks. She goes, hey, Dad, we haven't talked in a little while. I just want to get your advice. Here's the situation. What do you think? Well, the reason she calls me, she's 25. She's getting married in September. She's got a not beautiful, excuse me. She's beautiful. She has a handsome fiance. And I'm just so excited for her future. But our relationship is so close. She calls me regularly and asks for my advice. I don't know. I don't hear many dads talking about having that kind of relationship with their daughters.
Right.
But I long for them to have that relationship, and it's possible if they just constantly ask for feedback. And
Mhm.
how do we ask our kids for feedback? How am I doing? Uh, anyway, feedback is absolutely critical all across the board, especially with your team members to ascertain how you're doing. And it's one of the things I look for. It's one of the first things I look for in building teams is how open is someone to feedback? Because if they're not open to feedback, they're not willing to grow.
Uh, I love it. I love it, Randy. That's fantastic. And what a challenge for all of us just to think about asking for that feedback. I think some of the best words when people do give us that, you mentioned it, and I just want to highlight it because I call them best ideas. You made the statement when people to respond to them by saying, "What I heard you say was," and boy, how powerful that is that we've listened to them. We're seeking that we heard correctly what they were stating to us, and it shows the value that we have back for them. So I thought that was fantastic that you said that.
Mm.
Hey, real quick, this is personal, but
Yeah.
I'm curious. So I've got a daughter that's 25 as well. She's not married yet, or there's no guy on the horizon that I know of. So how did you handle the whole son-in-law thing? Did you give him a hard time? Did you question him? I mean, I'm just curious. You can help me out a little bit here. Prepare me.
Well, I'm not sure I've got any words of wisdom, but I will tell you this. The first time he asked for her hand in marriage, I looked directly at him and said, "You're not ready."
Wow.
And that took him aback. And he said, "Okay." And he said, why do you think that? And then it just gave us a great opportunity to open up the conversation and dialogue. They knew pretty early on that they wanted to spend the rest of their lives together. And while I didn't necessarily question that, I knew they weren't ready. And I said, well, one of the reasons is because I haven't fallen in love with you yet.
I
And I
love it.
said,
I love it.
in order for that to happen, we need to date a bit. And I said, so here's the deal. Let's get together and let's regularly schedule breakfast where we sit down and we talk.
Wow.
Because I want to have a relationship with him that will last for a lifetime. I
Mm,
don't want him just to marry my daughter and ride off into the sunset. I want to have an ongoing relationship where I have the opportunity, much like with my daughter, I can speak into his world. Not that I want to try to control it, but I want to be able to influence it. And I said, you have a wonderful relationship with Lindsay, but we don't have that relationship yet. And
mm.
I want to get to know you and I want you to get to know me. So we need to date. And so that's what we did for almost a year. And then as he grew comfortable and as I grew comfortable, he came back around and asked for her hand. And that's when I said yes.
Wow, man. I'm telling you, that's good stuff, right? I knew it was going to be a good story when you said the first time he asked for her hand in marriage. I knew you had me at that point, right? That you that something was good. But what a power, because the power of relationships, right? That you spend so much time talking about, and your vision that, hey, I want to have this person uh, in a lifetime. I've told every employee that I've ever had that same thing. I said, hey, you may work with me for a while, and I hope that you stay with me for a long time, but I want our relationship to last for a lifetime. So,
That's right.
wherever you go in the future, whatever happens, I want you to know you can pick up the phone and call me, because I think life is about relationships, which is one of the reasons I love your book so much. Hey, real quick before I'm getting some questions dinging me all over the place, but I know one of the things that I wanted us to hit on that you talked about is those difficult conversations, and you talk about raw conversations in the corporate workplace. Can you give just real quick a snapshot of how to handle difficult conversations like you did with your son-in-law, or in the workplace with an employee? What do you think is really key so that that difficult conversation doesn't turn the relationship sour, but actually builds it for success?
Oh, good. That's a great question. And it really all your raw is an acronym that stands for reality, advancement, and wrestling. It's kind of our take on, you've heard of fierce conversations or crucial conversations. There are a lot of people out there that have talked about the necessity of having those difficult developmental conversations. We just call them raw. And that stands for dealing in reality. In other words, you call it like it is. There's no hedging, there's no spinning, there are no excuses. I love this definition of an excuse. An excuse is a promise you make to yourself that you're gonna have to deal with this again. And so if you allow people to offer excuses, what you're doing is that you're just prolonging the pain. You can't prolong the inevitable. You can, but it makes it worse. It doesn't make it better. So reality, dealing in reality. What is the essence of the situation? Then A stands for advancement of the issues. In other words, we want to make forward progress. We don't have raw conversations to look through the rearview mirror and do a nauseatingly long post-mortem analysis. We want to look to the future, so we want to advance the issue.
Mm.
And then the last thing is wrestle to resolution. A lot of times I think raw conversations fall apart because people get into the ring and they aren't willing to wrestle the problem to the mat. They get uncomfortable, things get emotional, they get, inflamed, or people just get fearful and they jump out of the ring. You got to stay in the tunnel of chaos until you see the light at the end of the tunnel. And so you got to wrestle to resolution. And what does that mean? That means coming up with healthy solutions and being both committed to pursuing that together. So that's what a raw conversation is, and there are a whole lot of things that go into that. We talk about them and unpack those in the book itself, because those are not easy conversations, but they're necessary conversations, and a lot of people blow it when it comes to those conversations. And so we talk about, what are some things that you need to safeguard against? How do you have those constructively? But a big piece of that is the nature of the relationship going into the raw conversations, which comes all the way back full circle to what we were talking about earlier. One of the ways that you can promote healthy conversations that are raw is by constantly asking for feedback. Just like I asked my daughter for feedback, now she's asking me for feedback. And when you create those open loops of continuous feedback where anybody at any level within the organization can talk to anybody else about significant issues without fear of punishment or any sort of repercussions that might be negative, then you really have a great environment where healthy things can happen. And just like we have to have people speaking into our lives in order for us to grow effectively, those raw conversations need to be embraced in such a way that we recognize that people are helping us grow. And it's in the book what I call the self-help conundrum. You can't grow on your own. You have to have people in your world that are speaking truth. There's a great cartoon. There's a Frank and Ernest cartoon. You may remember Frank and Ernest. They were two vagabonds that traveled together. And in one single frame cartoon, they're sitting on a park bench, and Frank says to Ernest, he says, "Yes, there's a certain amount of pride in being a self-made man. But to tell you the truth, if I had it to do all over again, I would have gotten a little more help." So while there may be pride in being a self-made individual, the reality is we could all use a little more help.
I think it's fantastic. I like the whole wrestling model too as part of those raw conversations, because I feel like as a leader, one of the mistakes that I made, and I've shared with companies that I work with, sometimes I'd see a problem and I would address the problem, and I would even have a pathway to the problem.
Mm-hmm.
But when I didn't invite the person to come in with me and wrestle over it and really come to terms with how do we make this pathway forward, I found that they didn't buy into it necessarily. They didn't see the problem the same way that I saw the problem, or they didn't see it as serious as I saw it. And so that wrestling, I think, is such a key component
Yeah.
to those healthy relationships.
Well, to play off that, if I could offer just a quick formula for your team here, we unpack an idea, and it's a very simple formula. It's QI times A equals E. And it's to the very point that you just spoke about, Ken. QI is a quality idea, okay? A quality idea is often something that we as leaders bring to the table. We've got the experience, we've been there, we're subject matter experts, and so we bring a quality idea to the table and we want our teams to run with it. And unfortunately, a lot of times before we ever ask the question, before we let them wrestle with the issue, we sort of bring something to the table that we expect them to adopt, and they understand that it's a foregone conclusion that, Randy wants us to put the rubber stamp on this. That's a real problem, because QI, quality idea, times A, and A stands for adoption. It doesn't stand for agreement. It doesn't stand for acquiescence. It doesn't stand for acceptance. It stands for adoption. When you adopt a child, you become wholly responsible for that child. You bring it into your home, you take care of it, it's yours to nurture. And that is E. That leads to equals E. So QI times A equals E. E is execution. To your point, you can have a quality idea that's a 10, but if your team doesn't wrestle with it, if they can't put their fingerprints on it, if they don't make it their own, if they don't adopt it wholly emotionally, let's just say you have a quality idea that's a 10, but your adoption rate is only a 5 or a 6
Mm.
because they've acquiesced to what they know you want, but they're not excited about it, they're not enthused about it, then your execution rate is 50 or 60, right?
Mm.
But if you bring quality ideas to the table, you let them wrestle with it, you let them put their fingerprints on it, it may diminish it in terms of the quality in your estimation to an 8. But if when you walk away from the table, everybody else has adopted it as a 10, they put their fingerprints on it, they believe in it, they're behind it, you may think they've taken a little bit of the edge and the luster off of it, but the reality is your execution rate is going to be so much higher when you allow them to own the process. And that's exactly what you were just talking about. Simple idea, simple concept, but we so often forget that. And it escapes us sometimes as leader because we're pushing so hard to get things done.
Right. Well, I don't think it's all that simple sometimes. I think what you what you just talked about was sometimes one of the most difficult parts of leading teams and leading companies. So I think I love that equation that you have in the book. Hey, Sean Walker had a quick follow up to that idea of asking your daughter, "Hey, how am I doing?" Sean, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. First of all, thanks, Randy, for joining us today. So my question, you had the question of how you asked your daughter, how am I doing as a dad? How would you do that to like someone you lead or manage?
Yeah, good question, Sean. I think in much the same vein, I think you can just ask them a simple question like, hey, am I providing everything that you need as your leader to be successful in your endeavors? Or how could I do this better? What do you need from me right now? Because sometimes they need nothing more than encouragement. Sometimes they need direction and guidance. Sometimes they may need resources. Sometimes they may need for you to run interference. And sometimes we may think we know what they need and we try to provide something, but it's not exactly what they need. Sometimes all they need is for us to back away and give them the freedom and be their cheerleader. And so, asking them, what is it that you need? I think one of the dangers we as leaders have is when we begin to make assumptions about what other people need. And that's a problem for me in my relationship with my wife. I can assume that I know what she needs. It gets all the way back to languages of love, if you want to go that far. And Gary Chapman taught us a lot about that. Is that we can speak our language, but it not resonate with the receiving party. In the same way, as a leader, you may be doing everything that you think is necessary to be a great leader for that person and be completely missing the mark. And again, I think that's why this feedback is so absolutely essential, that we don't make assumptions, but we ask the right questions to find out what specifically does that person need at this time in that situation, and how can I facilitate their success. So we talk a lot about sharing the love in the book. There are a lot of things that you can share. You can share your knowledge, you can share your experience, you can share your story, you can share connections, you can share your relationships with others and connect people to the right people and resources. But you won't know unless you ask the question, what specifically do you need from me right now?
I thought that in the book was fantastic, the way you walk through that. And, I think even the whole idea of communicating to our team that we really want to be a good leader or one of the best leaders that they've ever worked with, it goes a long way as well. I used to come in and tell my team, and not that I'm always been the best leader, because I'm, recognize that I have blind spots and flaws as well. But I always said, hey, listen, you're going to remember two leaders in your life. You're going to remember your worst leader, and you're going to remember your best leader all of your life. I said, I hope you remember me, not because I'm your worst leader, but because, I'm your best leader. That's the goal that I have. And so, hey, let's work together over the next year, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever we're together, that if I can do something for you, if you need some help in some way, I want to be here because I want to be seen as that leader. So just even conveying that idea lets them know that, you're serious about it. But then following up with asking those questions, how am I doing? Are you happy to be under my leadership? Are you happy to be here? How can I get better?
Uh,
Just are key concepts to that. Hey, one of the members, I won't say which one, when you said that about asking your kids how you're doing, he texted he has a son and a daughter, and he said, how am I doing, or what can I do for you? The daughter responded back and said, find a cure for the virus, the COVID-19 virus. The son wrote back and said, what, question mark? And just shows you the difference between boys and girls sometimes, right?
Yeah, that's right. Boys tend to remain brain dead until they're about 24. Yeah. Has something to do with that testosterone wash in the womb. I'm not quite sure. It renders us mindless.
Well, my son's 22, so you just gave me a little bit of hope right there, because I got a couple more years, but he'll come out. Hey,
he'll get there. He'll get there.
Right. Hey, I know you do a lot of public speaking as well. You lead conferences. You're the keynote for lots of companies and organizations. Is there a trend that you're seeing right now in that public speaking, or is there a topic that companies are really asking you to focus on that's making a difference? Or can you share something off of one of your keynotes that might inspire us to think?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me correct you. I used to be a keynote speaker. I used to speak at conferences. My schedule was pretty full for this spring, and then surprise, surprise, right? So the messages that I enjoy bringing, Ken, and you know this because you know me, but I speak to Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies, and most of those companies are they have to remain politically correct. And so I get that. My background, if you know my heart, I'm a preacher incognito. I'm flying under the radar, but I'm trying to impart transformational truths into the marketplace that will change people's perspectives and change their lives for the good. And you and I know that truth only has one source, and that's directly from the heart and the mouth of God. And so I want to impart transformational truths, albeit biblical truth, into the marketplace, but without chapter and verse. And so what I do is I approach it from the standpoint of axiology. Axiology and theology are kissing cousins. And so all the principles of axiology can very easily be couched in biblical terms, but I don't do that because I'm trying to reach an audience that would not be open to that. As a matter of fact, in most situations, they may even be adverse to that. But I want to impart a message of hope, encouragement, and help them understand that life has purpose, life has meaning, and that they can find that. And so the messages that I want to bring are things like choose to be remarkable. What does that mean? And there are different maxims of value creation. You said it just a minute ago. The more value you create, the more invaluable you become. So how do you bring more to the table than you take away? Help people think about the positive weight that they're leaving in the world. What problems are you solving? Because the best way to create value is to find the biggest possible problem you can find and solve it. That's how you create value in the world. We were designed by God to be value creators. And while I don't say that in many of my keynote addresses, unless I know I'm working with an organization that's very faith forward, and that's okay to say, that's what life's really all about. It's about creating value. And that's what God put us in this world to do. So choosing to be remarkable, creating inspirational environments that encourage people to bring their best to work, leadership principles. We talk about that, how to build healthy, strong teams. And my messaging right now, the new book that I'm working on is a book focused on hope. You may have heard the statement, hope is not a strategy. Hope is actually the best strategy. And if you really understand hope, and once you parse hope and you define hope, then you begin to see that hope is foundational for any successful endeavor. Well, what's the genesis of hope? It comes back to this idea that the world is not a random, chaotic place, that the cosmos has been fearfully and wonderfully made, much like each one of us. And there's a reason for everything that transpires in the world. I mean, right before we came on today, I was telling you there's a quote from C.S. Lewis that I've grown really fond of during this period of time that simply says, God whispers to us in our pleasures. He speaks in our conscience, but he shouts in our pains. Our pain is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. And I think right now, this is interesting, but this is a time that the world is being roused, and he's trying to speak to a deaf world. And so I'm trying to write a message of hope and encouragement during this period of time that hopefully we can get into the market here pretty quickly, that might help give people some insight, some direction, and help them contemplate how they can build a brighter future.
Well, I just love your message, obviously, and I love, like I said, your values that you talk about in your books. And I love that you're a preacher incognito in the marketplace. Really, I mean, that's what God calls us to be, lights that shine in the darkness. And I tell business owners all the time, they're going to have an opportunity to touch people's lives through their customers, through their vendors, through their employees, people that would never necessarily darken the doors of a church or never come into relationship with a preacher or somebody of faith. And yet they come into our places of business daily, hourly, sometimes minute by minute, where we have an opportunity to impact them. And that's what you're doing through your books and through your writings and through your work. So I just want to say, well done. I appreciate that greatly. Hey, and I love your video. One of the things that I encourage people to go to Randy's site. He has or his website. He has a video on there, which is your declaration of being remarkable. That it's you're writing your story, and it's your commitment to that. I've got a couple questions on back to the relationship piece, but how would you encourage, just real quick, you obviously made a decision in your life that you said, hey, I'm going to be remarkable. I'm going to make this value creation. Would you say that it's something that every one of us needs to write a journal entry or a statement or paragraph that says, this is how we're going to be remarkable? Or how would you recommend that remarkable journey start for each of us?
No, that's a great question. One of the things we do in our workshop, Ken, is that we help people, encourage people to write a life purpose statement. I think it just serves as sort of a guiding point, a North Star. It can become the Polaris, as it were, of your own personal life. And for me, my North Star, my life purpose statement is to, in word and in deed, inspire others to be remarkable. That's, for me, that embraces and encompasses what I want my life to stand for. And I think when you've got that, then you can use that to guide you in every decision and every conversation. For me, it causes me to fall back and go, is this remarkable? Am I providing them what they need, someone else needs? Am I bringing to the table what I can for someone else's benefit? Am I creating value? Am I leaving a positive impression? So I think, yeah, it's very, very important to have something that you hold on to that's dear and significant to you, very impactful, very meaningful, that guides you in the process. So to craft that, I think is a very, very helpful process. If you're not intentional about it, you're going to drift. What you're referring to is our manifesto. And while my life purpose statement is very short and very succinct, because I want it to guide what I do, I want it to be ever present in my mind, the manifesto is a much more expansive explanation of what that means. We call it the Remarkable Manifesto. And it encompasses and embraces many more elements, but essentially is an extension of my life purpose statement.
I think that's awesome. Hey, one of the questions I received is when you talk about relationomics and, having this aspiration, and even as a parent, you say, hey, how am I doing? But there's sometimes where we have bad days as leaders and we need to go and apologize to our team, or we responded maybe out of our passion or out of our anger or out of our frustration, and maybe we've done some damage. The question I got was, how do you heal those relationships, and what's the role of the leader when they've messed up that relationship?
Yeah. Humility is the key. And there's a lot of talk about what humility is. But I think humility is just embracing your humanity is basically what it is. Not pretending to be any more or any less than what you are. And that incorporates two things: authenticity and transparency. And if I could just briefly define those, authenticity, as I see it, is being honest with yourself about yourself. That's authenticity. sometimes we're not honest with ourselves. We want to purport, promote, pretend, protect, all of those things. We're not honest with ourselves because it's painful, but we've got to do the hard work of introspection, get the feedback necessary for us to grow. Authenticity is being honest with yourself about yourself, dealing with your junk. And transparency is being honest about yourself with others. That's transparency. What you see is what you get. I'm not trying to impress you. I'm not trying to bowl you over. This is who I am, which means that I'm going to make mistakes. And I think when we go to our teams with authenticity, we understand who we are. With transparency, we're willing to share who we are. With humility, to say, I need your help. I'm human too. We all have our faults and our flaws. That's when we can begin to build strong teams. Because if I'm all that and I don't need other people, then why would I surround myself with other people? But when Ken, that I'm weak, I can lean into you where you're stronger than I am, and we can grow together and create so much more together than we ever could individually. I think humility is the essence of good leadership.
I like it. I like it. Hey, we did have a question. I'm going to get Ed in just a second, but I also had a question around employee reviews and how long do you put up with low performance or somebody that is making progress, but maybe they're not making progress as fast as they need to from a company perspective. Do you have any best practices on that or employee review models that you found that works effectively?
So there are a lot of companies that do performance reviews. We've all, talked about that, heard about that, applied that, whether it's annually, semi-annually, whatever. I think those performance reviews should be daily conversations. Mm-hmm. If not daily conversations, regular conversations. I think remarkable, raw conversations. We ought to be engaging with our people on an ongoing basis. I think performance reviews ought to be held almost with every single conversation. You ought to be asking a question. How are you doing? How can I help? Let me give you some feedback. Those ought to be going on all the time. And so when you're talking about how often do you check in on someone's progress, the answer is continuously. Performance reviews ought to be an ongoing conversation. I think they're not reviews, they're actually conversations, and they're ongoing. When we get that in our minds, then we can intercept entropy at its earliest phase and we can begin to offer some solutions. But I would offer this, once you have those conversations, and if you're having those conversations regularly and someone's not responding to it, let's say they're not open to feedback, they're resistant, then, and their performance continues to suffer. Here's a great question. You ready for this? So simple. And I learned about it from a great friend of mine, and she's a phenomenal leader. Here's the simple question. Are you happy doing what you're doing? Mm. And immediately, the reaction is, well, of course I'm happy. Why are you asking? And here's the follow-up. No, I'm serious. I mean, are you happy? Because in my experience, happy people do good work. And we've talked now on several occasions that your work is just not where it needs to be. So that leads me to believe that maybe you're not really happy doing what you're doing what you're doing. So let me ask this. What would you be happy doing? If I could give you a magic wand and you could wave it and create any job responsibility that best suits who you are, what would that be? What would make you happy? And sometimes when they answer that question, there may be an opportunity to move them laterally into another role in the life of the organization. As we well know, it's important to get the right people on the right seats on the bus. Sometimes it's a matter of providing more training for them to get them up to speed so that they could enjoy because they maybe feel overwhelmed. But sometimes it's an opportunity to move people out of the organization. Because here's the statement. I want what's best for you. And if you're not happy, I want you to be happy. If you're underperforming, you can't really be happy because you and I both know you're not bringing your best to the table. And I want you to be happy. And so I don't want you to suffer. And I certainly don't want the organization to suffer. I don't want relationships to suffer because you're not doing your job effectively. What would you enjoy doing more? And sometimes we just need to open up the door of opportunity for people to pursue other things in order for them to find a place of happiness and fulfillment, productivity. Because one thing I do know is unproductive people are typically not happy people.
Right.
And frankly, sometimes you can't do anything to help unhappy people become happy.
Right.
But it's just a great, easy, simple question. Are you happy doing what you're doing? Because in my experience, happy people do good work.
Right. Oh, and I love the value, you're adding value back to those individuals as well, because you're communicating that their happiness is important. And I know we just have a couple minutes left. Ed, I'm going to take you off of mute. Did you have a question for Randy?
Yeah, it was more of a comment, really. I love the C.S. Lewis quote that he mentioned earlier as you were talking about humility, Randy. His C.S. Lewis's quote about humility is one of my favorites. He wrote it in Mere Christianity. He says, humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. And I've always loved that.
That's good. That's good.
Hey, thank you, Ed. That's good information. Well, Randy, I'm so delighted that you was willing to come be a part of the CEO conversation. I appreciate our friendship, and probably one of the most prized moments was when you agreed to write the foreword to my book. That meant a great deal to me, and so now I can tell everybody to go read your books, which I do. But I say, well, at least read the foreword of my book, because that's at least Randy wrote that. So at least those 2 pages or 3 pages are good, because Randy wrote that part. We'll forget the rest of it. But anyway.
Well, it was an honor, and I truly say this from the bottom of my heart, that I appreciate what you're doing and appreciate the message that you're heralding into the marketplace as well. So keep up the good work.
Thank you very much. And everybody is just saying thank you for what you're doing. Great advice for business and for our personal lives. And boy, how helpful that is right at this moment where we're spending some time with our family. So I hope everybody text your family, talk to them right now. The takeaway from today, at least one of those takeaways, was ask people, how am I doing? And that can be true from both from our employees and from our family and our spouses as well. So, hey, Randy, thank you very much. I look forward to our conversation, and I'll be talking to you again soon. Thank you guys for joining in today. I hope you have a great
day. Ken, one last thing before you go. Can I interject something?
Yeah.
Feel free, anybody who's on the call today, to connect with me on LinkedIn. Would love to stay in touch, and wish you well. Stay healthy, stay safe, and stay connected.
Thank you, Randy.
Thanks a lot, Randy.
You do the same. Bye-bye now.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you, Ken.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.